Okay, 5.5 is solving radical equations, okay, which means solving equations with roots. We're mostly going to focus on square roots and cube roots, but it works the same no matter what the n is in the root, okay? And this should be pretty easy for y'all, okay? It's definitely something that we've been solving since probably 8th grade, okay? And there's only just going to be like one new thing that really is pretty much common sense on here. Okay, so let's see, our first problem is going to be the square root of x minus 1 equals 7. And remember, we are solving for x. We're trying to find out what x means, what x is. So we need to undo everything else around the x. Okay, if there was something outside the square root sign on the left-hand side of this equation, I would move that first. But since all we have here is the square root, then I'm going to undo the square root. Okay, I want to undo this minus 1 as well, but it's stuck inside the square root until I undo that. Also remember, a root with no number here is a square root. Okay, you can write a 2 there if that helps you. Okay, so to undo a square root, the opposite of that is square. Okay, so we're going to square this side. And you can't square one side without squaring the other, so I'm going to square this side. Okay, the square and the root cancel each other out, so the x minus 1 comes out by itself. And then 7 squared, remember that's 7 times 7. You can always do it in the calculator. Hopefully that one is not one that's so difficult. But I would use parentheses just in case this is a negative number and square it, and I get 49. Okay, so x minus 1 equals 49. Well, I'm still solving for x. I need to undo this minus 1, so I plus 1. X equals 49 plus 1, 50. Right, and remember, we can always check these by plugging it back in. Okay, if I do the square root of 50 minus 1, it gives me 7, what I had here. Okay, I just plugged in my answer where the x is in the problem. All right, oh, and we're going to 6. We're going to do 6 problems today, okay? The second one I'll put here is going to be the cube root of 5x plus 1, all of that's underneath the cube root, equals negative 4. All right, and like we saw on number 1, there's nothing outside the cube root. We would undo those things first. Since there's not, we're just going to go ahead and undo the cube root. The opposite of cube root is cubing. Okay, so cube root cancels out the cube. And that just breaks out the 5x plus 1. And then on this side, remember how to do it on both sides, negative 4 cubed. Again, right, you need to make sure you're putting it in parentheses. Negative 4 cubed is negative 4 times negative 4 times negative 4. You can do it that way as well. It gives me negative 64. Okay, pay attention to your signs. That will affect your answer, of course. Okay, so we have 5x plus 1 equals negative 64. Right, then what do we need to do? We need to subtract 1 and bring down my 5x. Negative 64 minus 1 is negative 65. And last, we do what? We divide. Divide by 5. Right, and negative 65 divided by 5 is negative 13. Okay, they do not always have to be whole numbers. You know that I usually do problems where there are whole numbers just because I think those are easier to deal with, but they could be decimals or fractions. But again, I personally like it to be a whole round number, especially when we're just learning it so that you feel like you're going in the right direction. Okay. let's see, number 3. Let's see, 2 radical x plus 1 equals 4. Okay, well, first of all, this radical, there's no number here. What does that mean that it is? A square root. Okay, that means that the n is 2, right? And if there's a 2 out front pressed up against it, right, that is multiplying times this. Okay, and like I said before, we're going to undo stuff on the outside before we undo what's on the inside. So this is 2 times the square root of x plus 1. So in order to get rid of that 2, I'm going to divide both sides by 2. Four divided by 2 is 2. Right now, all I have left on this left-hand side is the square root. Okay. And so to undo that, do the opposite of a square root, which is squaring it. I'm going to square both sides of my equation. Those will cancel out and leave me with x plus 1. 2 squared is what? 4. Right, so x plus 1 equals 4. If I subtract 1, 4 minus 1 is 3. And I know a lot of times we keep with kind of smaller numbers, but on some of these, you are going to have bigger numbers, like maybe 3-digit or 4-digit numbers, because when you're dealing with squaring stuff, the numbers can get super big super fast, or cubing stuff. So sometimes they're going to be bigger numbers. So don't worry too much about that. All right, remember, you can always check it by plugging it back into the equation if you aren't sure.